Hello, and welcome to the Scopo Podcast, Creating the Future, where we bring amazing characters across the triple helix, government, academia, and industry, and ask them to paint a big, bold vision of the future. But more importantly, we go vertical on how they plan to deliver that big, bold future. And today we're very, very privileged to have the one and only Whitney McNamara with us. Whitney is a senior vice president at Beacon Global Strategies. She's an OG in the defense tech innovation space with foundational work on two very important commissions, both commissioned by the Atlantic Council. The first one is the Defense Innovation Commission. And then the second one that you and I worked on was the Software-Defined Warfare Commission. Whitney, so wonderful to have you here in our DC studio. Really looking forward to a thrilling conversation about the future.
Thank you so much for having me. You know, I rarely get imposter syndrome, but listening to the other podcast episodes, I'm no Navy SEAL, I'm no former Olympian. So I'm really following a tough crowd here.
Yeah, we've had an astronaut as well.
Yeah, don't rub it in.
But you're above all those guys,
sure.
Whitney. So we're very, very happy to have you. Thanks for making the time today. And Whitney, so you've had a very interesting career. I wonder if you could walk us through how you decided to enter into the defense innovation, defense tech space, and if you could start kind of in your academic pursuits and what sort of drove you this way.
I think like all best careers, you fall into it and you sort of repivot every 2 or 3 years. And I think that's very much sort of how I ended up working in defense tech. Like many sort of elder millennials shaped by the 9/11 generation, I already had an interest in international affairs. I remember growing up reading, the international affairs section in New York Times with my dad. And I didn't know you could have work in that. I didn't know there were jobs doing that kind of in that field. But I was always interested in the world. And obviously, like a lot of folks my age, 9/11 was a huge moment at the age I was at. It made me very curious about different parts of the world I didn't know about. A huge catalyst, like I'm sure a lot of people that live in DC at my age, to better want to understand what it looks like to work in government. And interestingly enough, I still really loved science. I was really into science in high school. I studied science in college. I thought that's what I wanted to do.
What did you study in college?
Neuroscience, psychology.
Oh, okay.
And the funny thing is I look back and I really lacked imagination, not dissimilar to in high school. I really lacked imagination about what to do with a science degree. I thought you either got a PhD or you became a doctor. And I didn't think I wanted to do those either. And I definitely was someone that changed my major like 13 times, all within the science realm. And I actually had a professor who was really encouraging. He said, well, you're not really going to college if you haven't changed your major 8 times. So I appreciated that he was encouraging as I was figuring things out. I was very curious about a lot of different topics. But I think ultimately what it came down to was once I started to realize there was a career path in government, I changed my major my senior year. I got a major and a minor in poli-sci and Arabic. Sorry about that, all those science classes. And of course, when I graduated, I at least had the humility to know that who would hire me.
Right.
I spent my time outside of the classroom in labs and as a teaching assistant to these science classes, right? I hadn't really cut my teeth on the policy world. I had taken a ton of Arabic classes. And so I sort of looked at USA.gov's, that beautiful black hole of a jobs hole. And I remember looking what would I love to do in 10 years? And jobs that sounded really exciting to me at the time all had 2 things in common, like time spent in the region, the Middle East, and some fluency in the language. So I thought, I guess my first step is I have to go live in the Middle East. And I graduated college at 21, and I told my parents that's what I was going to go do. I didn't know anyone there. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a job. And of course, when you're 21, you're so sure that you're an adult. And it's funny, I look at my sister's stepkids, and I remember when they turned 21, and the pit in my stomach when I thought about one of them telling me they wanted to move to the Middle East. So that was a moment years later that I had to actually go apologize to my dad because I went. And of course, folks didn't want me to. My parents didn't want me to. No one really understood, but I went, and I was really industrious. I was like, well, surely there's jobs everywhere. I didn't think I was going to go and run the United Nations. I thought I would go and anything. I would do anything to pay my rent, basically. And that looked like teaching English for $1 an hour, which was enough to feed myself.
Which country?
This was in Jordan.
Oh, wonderful.
So I went to Jordan, and I thought I'd stay a year, come home, go back to DC, look for some, job at a think tank. Arab Spring broke out 6 months after I moved there. So this was in 2010. And there was suddenly an increase of funding for local civil society organizations to strengthen elections, solidify political parties, help voters understand their rights. And so I started working for a Jordanian civil society organization, of which there was probably 5 at the time. Help monitor the first independently monitored election in Jordan. And so I started doing sort of humanitarian civil society work. I was part-time journalist for local newspapers and really just learning about the world, right? And so that went on for about 3.5 years.
Wow. And did you get to travel all over Jordan? I
did. I spent a lot of time traveling all over Jordan, spent a lot of time, in the Levant area, Egypt, Oman. And it's crazy to look back on it now. Again, talk about being an overconfident 22-year-old.
Yeah, I absolutely love Jordan. It's so soulful. It's you've got Wadi Rum there. You've got the River Jordan, where Jesus was baptized and all that. And what else? The Dead Sea. It's just so.
And Wadi Rum. I know we've talked about that. It's such a special
Wadi
place.
Rum is just amazing. So you're traveling in and around the region. Mm-hmm. And you wrapped that up in about 3.5 years?
Yeah.
Or did you spend some time in Dubai as well?
I did. So, again, living off of a local salary didn't leave much to my savings account. So I wanted money to go home, pay first and second month's rent in an apartment. I took my GREs in Dubai. In Dubai, I made just a little bit more money to try and save just to come back home eventually. So I applied for grad school from there, and eventually I got accepted and came back and started at Johns Hopkins SAIS.
Oh, what a great program.
I was so excited. It's where I always wanted to go. And I always thought I would study foreign affairs. But what I realized was I should probably get a degree in something that complements some of the work I had done. And foreign affairs, right? We do civil society, humanitarian aid. I also should understand how our country goes to war. What does that look like?
I think it's so important after these really exciting lived experiences to go back to school and write about it and process what you observed in those 3.5 years in the region, right? Because you're speaking firsthand with all the people you met. What were your biggest takeaways from that experience in the Middle East, and then writing about it and sort of thinking about how it shapes U.S. foreign policy?
I think there is, again, like a ton of humility there. And it's interesting, I've never thought about it this way until you've said it, which is it's a really important skill to not agree with someone, but know why they feel that way and why you would probably feel that way if you were in their shoes. And I think, too, what I always struggled with is to capture the nuance of what it was like to live in the Middle East. There are so many wonderful things about that culture, and there are so many wonderful people. And there's a lot of things that are broken, and there's a lot of hardship. And it wasn't always an easy experience. And so I think capturing that nuance of a people, of a society, of a country is something I learned to have appreciation for. And just a humility to say, I don't necessarily have to agree with the people in my life there, but it's good to know why they feel that way and have an appreciation for it. And if you're going to make decisions that impact their lives, it's good to know how they might react to it, what they're motivated by. So again, not necessarily always agreeing, but just an appreciation for a lot of the nuance of where people sit and their their perspectives.
So you finish the degree at SAIS, and then what happened next? What was next in your?
So I realized quickly defense was it for me, and I just loved talking about it qualitatively, quantitatively. And again, it's just so funny, these full circle moments. I loved watching war movies with my dad growing up. And so it is funny how you just kind of find these things as an adult. Again, I didn't know what a young girl would do watching these war movies related to that. But here I am, many years later. So I start working at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, which is a think tank that focuses on long-term military competition with Russia and China. And I did a lot of great policy work there with Honorable Eric Edelman, one of the smartest people I've ever met. And that was such a great experience. And then very quickly, I started getting brought on to contracts where the Department of Defense would hire us to help solve tech adoption challenges.
Interesting. So what year is this?
This is about 8-9 years ago now. So 2017.
Okay. And I got to ask, what does your dad do, or what did he do? I mean,
it's funny you ask that. People ask me all the time, do I come from a military family? No, my dad's a scholar. Okay. I mean, he's a scholar at heart. He used to work on the Hill on policy. I was actually born here. He worked on the Hill, but we moved to Philly very quickly after that. And he transitioned into the nonprofit world, but he's still very much a scholar at heart. He wrote a book on Czech legionnaires. So definitely have a shared interest with him in conflict and history and all of that.
Gotcha. And so you're coming back to this. You're writing reports for DoD on tech adoption, 2017, 2018 time frame.
Yeah, which is a really interesting time for that conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have a CEO of a company that we acquired, Crowd AI, which was just entering the defense tech space at that time when it wasn't cool, right? It wasn't cool. It's Silicon Valley based company. And David Key, David Key, right? She could tell you some stories of what it was like during that time frame.
Yeah. It's crazy to think it wasn't that long ago, but the conversations we were having were very green. I remember it was like, okay, AI is all the thing, but what is a governance strategy? And that was like novel at the time to be like, what's our governance strategy to enable AI? That was a project we worked on. And a lot of this was under Brian Clark, who now works at Hudson with Dan Patt and Tim Walton. So if you know them and their expertise, you just know the kinds of really in-depth work we were doing. And they were really ahead of their time on a lot of these issues. So really, really quickly, it was a lot of work doing future warfare. What does that look like with our organizations like Office of Net Assessment, DARPA, and then sort of working backwards. Where do we want to be? What are our policy and acquisition challenges to get there? And we even talked about it's really hard to buy a software-defined radio, right? I mean, this is, again, 8 years ago. So that was a big focus of the work I did for about 3 years there.
Okay, and so after that, what happens next? Did you go to Defense Innovation Board? Or?
Yeah, I did. Okay. I did. So I thought, even though I thought we were really impactful with a lot of these recommendations to government, I thought, well, doing it in government, I knew it was harder.
All right.
It's hard to implement things. And so I thought, well, why don't I go into the building and try to work on some of this? And I went to go work at DoD CIO first.
Okay.
Because we had done a lot of work on electromagnetic spectrum operations. So I continued some of that at CIO, which was fun because I started the first week of the government shutdown.
Oh, wonderful. So, wonderful.
Very interesting time to start a new job. And then afterwards, I went to the Defense Innovation Board in R&E.
Okay. And what were you doing at the Defense Innovation Board?
So a big part of that was figuring out what the research agenda was going to be, right? We had just come off the software SWAP study, software pathway acquisition study, led by Josh Marcuse at the time. And I think it was what does 2.0 look like? And so part of my job was, and I took meetings anywhere from the DepSecDef's office all the way down to the training ranges and everywhere in between, just to say, what are your problems? What issues are you facing? And start developing rack and stacking, how could we be the most impactful from where we sit?
How many interviews do you think you've done? From the very beginning.
Well, speak of everything, in terms of everything coming full circle, one is, this was the most interesting thing to me is I'm quantum and AI and kill chains. And you know what I heard the most from all of these interviews was, could you do a SWAP 2.0 study? I made so much progress with the first one. We had so much momentum. I've stalled. I need top cover. I need new ideas about how to keep moving. And so one, I think it's interesting that, I guess, 3-4 years later, we do another very big study on software adoption. The second thing is I saw someone at the Atlantic Council software adoption rollout who said, I talked to you when you were at the DIB. And I remembered him. And he shared anecdotes with me that I put in the report years later.
Wow.
And so again, it's like, I'm like, I didn't forget any of those meetings I had, anything I was learning, and it still really informs how I show up to talk about the policy landscape today.
Well, it's so organic to get that information from the edge, from the people closest to the problems. And you're one of the best listeners I've ever met. And you not only you listen well, but you synthesize what you're hearing, you connect the dots, and that's probably why Beacon snatched you up. Is that where you went after the DIB? Or?
It was. And I thought too, like, the work at CSBA, a lot of it was, what are the best practices that took us to the commercial sector a lot of the time. Like, how's the commercial sector doing data governance? And then, of course, even at the DIB, right? It's like, what can we pull in from the commercial sector? Not just tech, but best practices approaches. So I thought, well, I guess the next step would be just to be a lot more firmly grounded in the industry. The goal is always to go back to government, but I was like, let me try my hand at this. And so it's funny, I really jumped into Beacon without understanding it because it's such a unique business model, but it really is, how do you navigate the system? What that entails is pretty expansive, as you can imagine. It's scrappy. There's no guidebook. If there was, I'd invite you on my yacht because I'd be really rich, right? But just figuring out how to navigate the system from an industry perspective.
Do you travel a bunch there, or are you just mostly here in DC?
I would say a lot of this too, it's interesting. It feels like we're so far from it. It was like pandemic, like still like coming out of the pandemic, which has been an odd time. But we do go to conferences. We do, obviously a lot of it is like, how do we just get good touch points to understand demand signals? We always want to make sure we're meeting folks where they are.
Right.
So in so much as that's helpful, we're absolutely still traveling around.
Okay. And so then you got a big promotion last year. Congratulations on that. Drinks are on you tonight, right? And did I get that right? You're senior vice president at Beacon Global Strategies.
In the tech and national security practice.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. And who's the leadership in that practice?
So Lauren Badula is the leader. She's been at the firm 10 years and really created the practice from the ground up. So just a total powerhouse I've learned so much from.
Yeah, and she's got her own podcast. Is she okay with
you
on this one? Well, I'm sure we're going to blow her ratings out of the water. So sorry about that, Lauren.
Don't tell her.
But okay, so that sort of takes us to present day. And where our lives sort of intersect is on this Atlantic Council Commission on Software-Defined Warfare. But I want to revisit the first commission you did with Atlantic Council, and you were one of the co-authors of that, right? And it was the Defense Innovation.
It was.
What was the title of it?
It was Defense Innovation Adoption.
Okay.
And my co-authors there were Pete Modigliani and Eric Lofgren and Matt McGregor. So again, total powerhouses of budgeting and acquisition expertise.
Okay. And so what were the big takeaways from that commission? And then how much of that commission was adopted? Just sort of, let's go vertical on that.
It's funny. I don't think any of us knew what we were signing up for when we signed up for that commission. I think we all had the same vision, as we didn't want another report collecting dust.
Right.
And I give a lot of credit to Secretary Esper for being a forcing mechanism for that one. We probably had 175 recommendations, and he said, I give you 10. And that was frustrating, as you can imagine. But
Who were the co-chairs?
So Debbie James was one of our co-chairs, as well as Mark Esper.
Okay. And what years?
This was 2.5 years ago. Okay. So maybe 2021, 2022.
Okay.
What is time? 2022. That's
it. Okay. So 2022 Defense Innovation Commission.
And the ethos, I should start by saying, is basically, one that we all know very well is, commercial innovation has provided us with amazing capabilities. One of the greatest advantages the U.S. has in a competition is our industrial base and flexible capital funding. One anecdote that always stands out to me is over the last 10 years, there's been $200 billion spent just on unmanned ground vehicle development. The Department of Defense could never compete with that amount of money for one discrete use case for likely just one service. And so it's how can we be better pulling in some of these commercial technologies, widening the aperture, what's the demand signal, how can we make that clear to industry, lower barriers to entry? I think we all knew what right looks like. I think the challenge was, how do we solve this without saying do more AI or spend $1 billion or stand up some new organization that's going to fix all of our problems?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, right about this time frame, Admiral Cooper and I were standing up Task Force 59. You probably didn't even know.
No, we were admirers.
Okay,
we were admirers of the work. We were definitely tracking the model, especially around experimentation, getting that feedback loop.
But with probably a little bit of skepticism. Another innovation, or were you looking at it because it was from the edge, from the end users, from the war fighters?
Yeah.
I mean, we were just trying to solve a problem.
Totally. I think my only skepticism is, how do we bring this into broader processes? Yeah. And I think that's always the frustration. It's like we get these organizations or these initiatives and they've demonstrated value, but they usually have demonstrated value because they sit outside of our org structure. Yeah. So then how can we make sure the successes, the lessons learned, whatever came of that gets integrated into big Navy or big DOD or whatever that looks like? But no skepticism. It's more like, how do we make this last? And how do we make sure this is the norm and not something that a unique organization does outside of the larger bureaucracy? Okay.
And so you do 10 recommendations there. How many of them would you say were adopted?
So 8 out of the 10 were made into law, were adopted into the NDAA. And I think, honestly, again, this was probably the biggest learning lesson in ideas don't matter. If it's ideas, implementation, ideas 20%, implementation 80%.
Okay.
I think our ideas subjectively were excellent. Okay. They were very well grounded in what would move the needle, what was possible. Working at CIO, I wrote tech implementation strategies and I was on the receiving end of implementing them. And I can, run you through all of the pitfalls of that. But our concern was we'd write something, it'd be put into the NDAA, it gets sent over to DOD, to GS-13, and they're like, I don't have the authority to do this. I don't have the budget to do this. This isn't my problem. And it dies on the vine. So we were very much like, is this the right lever? Who would execute on this? Are they empowered to do so? So it wasn't just about the idea. It was like, how do we make sure this doesn't die on the vine? So the ideas were like half the battle.
Yeah, and there's so many reports out. I'm sure there's a new couple out this week. So that's really thoughtful of you to think it all the way to the end. My favorite quote of all time is a Leonardo da Vinci quote: "Think well to the end, consider the end first." And that, I mean, what you just talked about is really breathing life into that.
And going into the second commission, I think it's like, well, at the end of this, I've got to go talk to a probes.
Yes.
So even in the idea stage, it's not to cut off ideas in stage 1 because in stage 50 probes will hate it. But I am like keeping that org chart in mind. Who needs to approve this? Who would hate this idea the most? Do I need their buy-in? What might they like about it? How might I alter the recommendation to build these coalitions to get it done? So you do have to think that far in advance.
Yeah. So now we're shifted to the Software Defined Warfare Commission, which you also co-authored. And who are your co-authors on that one?
So Tate Nurkin and back with Pete Modigliani, my partner in crime.
Okay, partner in crime. And I was part of this commission, and I saw, it's so interesting to see, all these people converge on this problem, and you've got to sort through all these different random, ideas on how to fix this going forward. And you did a brilliant job of writing a really, really compelling report. And I'm actually here in DC because we're about to go to the final meeting tomorrow, I think it is. Yeah. What were your biggest takeaways from the second commission?
I think going into it, I thought it would be easier because the problem set was bounded. But defense innovation is broad. Like what levers, I mean, what are we talking about, right? And so that was scoping it, I think, was weirdly easier than we thought. Software, I thought, well, it's very discrete.
Yeah. I remember that first
and then on
meeting.
day 7, you're like, oh no, like, are we talking about not just adopting new software, not just updating legacy software? Are we talking about how to interconnect new and legacy software? We can't talk about acquisition without talking about people. We can't talk about people without talking about hardware, but we don't want to go too far into hardware. And so it quickly became really unruly. And so we did a lot more work on the front end of this. And I think I'm like 8 months pregnant at this point when we're kicking it off. So I'm trying to get in as much work in on the front end when I know I'm going to be out of pocket for a little bit. But we whiteboarded it. And I think we still have a picture of the whiteboard, but it's just insane. All the ideas that like, pie in the sky. What could we try to address here?
I love the whiteboard. Have you been out to San Diego yet?
No.
So I have that in the SCAPA headquarters. I have that Leonardo da Vinci quote above our whiteboard, and it's the most powerful piece of tech that we have at SCAPA. And so I just loved.
It can be very clarifying.
Yeah, that idea of going to the whiteboard, and then what's really hard to do is translate the ideas to reality and to action.
Totally.
And so what are your hopes for the Software Defined Warfare Commission? We were limited to 10.
Yeah, we were limited to 10 and we actually got it to 9.
Okay, so 9 recommendations. And there's 3 buckets. Can you explain for the audience those 3 buckets?
3 buckets would be tech, process, people. I don't know that there's clear silos because, everything touches, but there is a Venn diagram where there's some overlap. But we felt we couldn't, those were the 3 sort of pillars we wanted to address. And even though human capital, I think it's just the hardest piece of this, we couldn't not address it. And Tate really led on that. And I think he came up with really fantastic approach to it. And Pete focused a lot on just removing the chaff, requirements, streamlining, how do we measure success, really about organizational best practices for software adoption.
I got to tell you, for me, the people is the most important part. I've seen that sort of throughout my Navy career and here in the private sector, just assembling a team of creative, mission-focused doers, I think, is the key to unlocking the future, and that's what this podcast is all about. Do you have a similar shared experience? Or
I do, and I think and this is something we talked about even for the first commission. Is a lot of this too is we don't want to reinvent the wheel. If something is going well, what went well? Why did it go well? How can we incentivize people to keep doing it? And one of the common themes of what was going well is an empowered leader that was taking on risk and letting their people take on risk and breaking things and maybe pissing some people off, right? And you can't legislate that. You can't, and we can, I know lots of folks have come at this from different angles, but the hiring process is what it is. People are what they are, right? It's really hard to prescribe that. And so one of the things that we talked about in the software study is what's the archetype of what we're looking like? Because sometimes when you talk about talent, we talk about coders. We're not really talking about coders, right? I always use the analogy if you're at a Facebook or a Google and you're a program manager, you're very technically literate, but you don't have to be a PhD. You need to know how to get stuff done. That's also a hard job description to write, right? Get stuff done, solve problems.
Well, and that notion of risk taking, we had a big risk taker out there at NAVCENT, Admiral Cooper was just so great to work for him and see him, take that risk and really give us the space to really push the boundaries of what's possible. So thanks for highlighting that appetite for risk. Okay, so now we're getting to what everybody's tuned in to hear. All right, this is the SCAPA podcast, Creating the Future, right? So I want to get your views on the future, however you define it. If it's a 1 year from now, 2 years, 5 years from now, and paint for our audience a vision of what that looks like.
Yeah.
And then we're going to go a vertical on how to bring it to reality, right?
Yeah.
You've got a proven record of this
Yeah.
with your recommendations and your work at the Defense Innovation Board. But we're at an inflection point.
Yeah.
And so over to you, Whitney.
No pressure.
What's the...
And I definitely have a vision of what right looks like, and I think mine is a little specific, but I think, and I'll come back to like the implementation piece. I mean, for me, like at the end of the day, and I think this is a big ethos of sitting at Beacon, it's like we want competition. We want a strong demand signal. We want to compete, win or lose, and then we want there to be predictable funding for people that win.
Mm-hmm.
And I worry that there is so much noise.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard for the government to cut through that noise internally in the bureaucracy and noise in the industry too about what things really are and what deployment really looks like. And I know a lot of that comes down to like really unsexy stuff, like really good financial management people that know how to POM. It's not necessarily always going to be experimentation. It's like when that goes right, who's writing the contracts? Who is making sure the money is POM for? Who's passing a budget on Congress? So a lot of this too, and this is again like deeply unexciting. It is like we have this system. It's not perfect. We've been able to do pretty great things with the system. And so I think for me, and the commissions have only grounded this, and my work at Beacon has only grounded this, is I think we all agree what right looks like. It doesn't mean everyone has a seat at the table, but it's like competition that benefits the warfighter. It benefits the taxpayer dollars. If you are providing, tech or services to DoD, that bar should be really high. And we should be empowering folks in DoD to know how to set the bar, how to make sure that bar is being met, and if it's not, to recompete something.
Yeah, I love that. And so, and just, I'm telling you from this side, we in industry, we love to compete, but ultimately we want the same thing at the end of the day. We want the warfighter to have the absolute best kit possible, as fast as possible, to deter and if necessary, fight and win. So we've got a really interesting and really tight-knit defense tech community in San Diego. I hope you come out there to visit it sometime soon.
Especially on this rainy day. San
Diego.
Sounds really nice.
We're in DC today, and it's raining. But it's always sunny in San Diego. All right, Whitney. So really, again, I love how you think with the end in mind. What does that look like in 5 years if we're successful at doing all the things that you just articulated?
I think like resiliency and adaptability is always going to be king, especially because I think one of the benefits of our military is the mission command piece. Like no matter what's going on, I always bet on our people for that very reason, for a lot of reasons, but one of them being that mission command piece. So if we trust our people, then we should trust them to say, this isn't working, I need to inject something new, or give them a suite of capabilities that allows them to be the most empowered at the edge and in smaller formations.
Yeah, there's this interesting dynamic there's a convergence of new emerging technologies that when combined creates new capability, which is very, very exciting. But there's also power in divergence. Once you get that tech to the edge and the operators, the end users adapt for their current situations. For example, what worked for us in the Middle East may not be relevant in the Black Sea, which may not be relevant in the Pacific. But I think one of the keys is getting that kit, that capability in the hands of the end users so they can tailor it in a way that fits their problems.
And I always think like left of boom, like all the rules go out the window, right? However, and I think we look at like something like Ukraine and we look at their successes. And I also think we should look where they're struggling and what can we be doing now to make sure we don't struggle in the same way. Like technical debt is a huge thing. If someone generates a TTP, there's no way to share it with the forces 50 miles north. No one's codified it. And I appreciate at war, it's like the last thing on everyone's mind. But there are things that we can be doing, like functionalities, how do we share information, lessons learned, just things like that, I think are a lot of ways that if that happens, we're just in a much better position.
Gotcha. And can you share your thoughts? Can we just do a little bit of a world tour here, and you give us your thoughts on how you see things playing out?
It's funny. I remember in grad school, one of our professors is the former acting director of the CIA, John McLaughlin. And he said, when I was in grad school, I think he actually also went to SAIS.
Yeah.
So when I was in grad school, world events, diplomacy, it was a waltz. Everyone knew the dance, and occasionally someone stepped on your foot. He said, the world that you are graduating into is a mosh pit. And I think about that all the time. And that was 10 years ago, and it's probably even more so now. I think we shouldn't be surprised. I think for the past 10 years, 7 years, we've been saying that this era is coming. We're in it. And I think a lot of folks in this arena know the stakes and they know the consequences. And that's where you see a lot of the motivation, but also a lot of the frustration. So timelines aside, I think we do struggle with the lack of urgency. So anything, when we call it the Davidson window or nothing, I mean, it helps to feel like we have been sitting in peacetime for a while. I feel it from talking to family and friends outside the Beltway who still don't understand why Taiwan matters, why Ukraine matters.
Yeah.
And I think we've stopped telling people why our role in the world matters and what's going on. And I think I appreciate folks don't always want to be spending billions of dollars on the military, but I don't think they properly understand the threat. And we're not going to win over everyone, but we have stopped communicating. I always think communism, the Soviets, was a very clear narrative. It's much more complicated now with 3 spheres of growing influence outside the U.S. But I do think there's that disconnect.
Yeah, and there's power in storytelling, real power in storytelling. And I agree that there needs to be more storytelling that articulates the value of investing in defense, and not only investing in defense, but investing in disruptive innovation. I mean, the disruption is underway now. Like I said, we're at an inflection point. And if we miss it, we could be trailing.
Totally.
So Whitney, we're just about to wrap the SCAPA podcast with you. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share? What else is on your mind?
I'd say the final thing I've thought about in terms of big ideas, implementation, what that looks like, is I don't think we're ever going to wake up and be like, we did it. Our acquisition system looks good. We've got all the right people. We've got a really great pipeline for commercial tech. We're just never going to wake up, and that's going to be the case. And so I always just think about just the scrappiness. Do there need to be 1,000 more commissions that meets the DoD where it is in that moment and keep moving forward with reform? And so I always think our job is never going to be done. And I hope to spend the next few decades continuing just to perfect it, right? Because our military deserves it. Again, our taxpayers deserve it. And so I think the implementation piece, meeting DoD where they're at and continually trying to improve the system is something that really motivates me.
Yeah. Could you envision yourself coming back into the government? Or
I'd love to.
Yeah,
I'd love to. That would be the ultimate goal. I don't know what that would look like, but I would be humbled to.
Well, Whitney, you're like an OG in this space, and you've been at it since since the early days of the defense tech adoption discussion. Thank you very much for joining us here in DC. And it was a real pleasure to not only have you here, but work with you on the Software Defined Warfare Commission at the Atlantic Council.
Same. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Whitney.
Appreciate it.